And we are live. Of course, it'll take folks a moment to populate in because I have this semester not been good about setting up pre-roll. I've wanted to do that, so there's like a little, hey, the stream's going to start. And then folks can kind of just boot it up. But I will get there eventually. Thanksgiving break, winter break, somewhere. I will get a pre-roll going. So we will welcome friends as they populate the room here. And chat is working. It does say hello, friends. So how have you been?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Dana?
Doing great. Also doing great. We are birthday twins.
Oh, that's right.
So we both have a birthday happening at the end of the month.
Very exciting.
You doing anything fun for that?
No. Nope. Haven't thought of anything. Are you doing anything fun?
Tomorrow. Well, so my in-laws are coming up tonight. We are going apple picking tomorrow.
Yes.
Doing like all the really extra autumnal stuff, but also because the baby will be cute doing that. So,
oh yeah.
Because she's walking and running, and we'll be able to like pick that apple, and she'll go for it. So we're doing that, and then birthday itself will probably be pretty chill, which is how I like my birthdays. But yeah, very exciting. So for folks that join us today, and as mentioned last week, we are finally doing a chapter that I have wanted to look at from the launch of the stream. And I initially sent Elizabeth an email saying, I loved flowers, though. I love this work. Let's do it. And then you were like, oh, by the way, the AMS Ludo group already scheduled me. And I looked at the schedule and I was like, yes, indeed. So we did that one first. But I'm very happy to finally get to do this one because this was sort of one of my introductions to Ludomusicology as a whole. AMS, was it? There wasn't a study group yet. It was just a Ludo session at New Orleans at the Triple Conference.
It was one that I think Will Chang kind of spearheaded, and I think Will Gibbons was also presenting. Mm-hmm. I think Neil was also presenting. Trying to remember who else. I'm going to forget everyone, but it was definitely my first presentation at one of the big conferences, so it was pretty exciting.
And I was a newbie grad student. It was my first ever conference of any kind that I had attended, and I saw it on the program, and I was like, oh my gosh, I love video games. And so I went to the session and was just so excited because I'd read Will Gibbons and I had read Neil Lerner's stuff in Disability even, and went up and talked to Neil about arcade cabinets afterward, and said I want to do like video game music and disability studies, and he went, oh my god, there's two of us. And I was like, this is the best field ever. Everyone's so nice, because I was nervous, and I remember being so enchanted with this work in particular, and sort of wondering like, will I ever get that good? But I'm also not a theorist, so it's like apples and oranges at times comparing, but I remember wondering if I would ever meet the bar that this paper set. So I've been a fan. So I was really excited when this came out. Excited. Felt cute. My delete has read your research, so good stuff. Ooh. Yeah, Elizabeth has some really awesome stuff, and a pretty fantastic dissertation, I will say, which we all cite.
I was going to say, this is definitely from the dissertation. This is part of that string of publications that, kind of pull parts from my dissertation, because that's
what you do.
That's a good thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I also feel like this works pretty well as a standalone thing because, I don't know, Flower is such a interesting game. You could easily, this could be so much longer too. Like you'd easily spend so much time dealing with this game, and I really like it. So.
I love this one. So this landed, so again, there's some of this in the dissertation, but this version of it landed in the Routledge Companion to Screen, Music, and Sound, which is a really fun volume because it's got a real range. This is one of my favorites of the ones that aren't just Ludomusicology specific. If we're recommending ones to have your libraries buy, everybody, and you don't have this one, there's just really, really neat chapters in this one. That I've referenced A bunch. I think who else is in this from the Ludo side of things?
Oh,
Doesn't
I
Will
was gonna
Gibbons have a
say there's a.
chapter?
Ooh, I honestly don't remember. I could check, but I was gonna say
Let me
one
pull it
I
up.
always think about in here is Frank Lehman has a really great article
Oh
about
yeah.
analytical approaches to film and to video game music, just kind of summarizing things that had been done up to that point. Super great resource.
Yeah. I'm gonna jump back to. It's a big book. Has Yoda on the
Hmm.
cover.
It's a big book. I know it's
Let's
over on my
see.
bookshelf. I could go grab it if necessary.
KJ Donnelly has a chapter.
It's really long too. There's a
Yeah.
lot of.
This is a big one. Christine Jorgensen has a chapter. Oh
Oh yeah,
yeah,
I'm
emphatic and
noticing.
ecological sounds in game world interfaces. I've read that so many times. See, this book is so much more useful. I've forgotten how useful it is. Tim
Yeah,
Summers
I'm
has a
noticing that
chapter.
my
Just like
citation is on page 542. It's chapter 43, right? This is a really big book.
yeah,
It's got a lot of
James
people in it.
Deville has a trailer
Hmm.
for cinematic, but he's also done a little work in the Ludo realm.
Yeah, right, right.
There's so many people in this. It's all Stephen Bastead. Uh, William Gibbons, he is in it. Okay. Oh, this is where the post-millennial fantasy role-playing game chapter is. That gets cited a fair amount. Let's see. But yeah, there's like so many good. Yeah, Frank Lehman's is great. Such a good volume. And I think it's always good to read the screen media stuff too. It's
Hmm.
hard to keep up in all fields at all times because like game studies often has useful stuff too.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
volumes like this can be really nice because you get to sort of see what else is happening.
Yeah.
Are you going to be at SMT? Our chat asks.
I'm going to be at SMT. I just booked my flights. I'm super
Woo!
excited. I haven't been to an in-person conference since before COVID.
Yeah, same. I think
Yeah, you're going to be there, Dana?
Hartford Nacfagum might have been my last one because I
Hmm.
skipped AMS that year because my wedding was in November, and so I had like last minute wedding
Okay.
preparations. So that my last one was Hartford Nacfagum early 2019. So it's been a while. I'm going to be there because I'm presenting.
Woohoo!
Ha!
Woohoo!
I'm so excited. I'm actually presenting on a panel with Will Gibbons. So,
Woohoo!
ooh, taking a train. That'll be a fun way to get there. Yeah, I'm
That's awesome.
excited. It's very full circle because my first conference was New Orleans, was the Triple Conference. I saw this
Right.
paper at it,
Yeah.
and here it is, all those years later, and now I get to give a paper back in New Orleans. So it just feels very full circle. I'm really
Yeah,
excited.
super cool.
I'm presenting on oh goodness, that Dragon Cancer, real uplifting
Mm,
game.
mm,
And I'm using Elsa Lipscomb's work on hospital soundscapes. I'm looking at Alison Kafer's work on crypt time and sort of like temporal distortions of being in long-term hospital stays and
mm,
how that's reflected in the musical score. And then there's also some work on like kind of public versus private mourning, putting it into conversation with John Adams on the transmigration of souls. So it's a heavy
amazing.
chapter, but it's one that I'm really excited about. It's going in my eventual book. So
Woohoo.
woo,
What day are you presenting, Dana? I haven't looked at the
Thursday.
schedule yet. I will be there on Thursday this year. All
Woo!
right.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's like
Excited.
Thursday mid to late afternoon. I don't like
Awesome.
2. I don't remember exactly what time, but yeah, Will and I
I will be
um,
there.
are on the session together, so it's gonna be a really good time.
Fantastic.
I'm very excited.
Yay.
I will
Yay, yay.
try to stream. If I can't stream it, I'll at least record it because knowing
Mm,
that the hotel Wi-Fi might not be up to the task, I will the very least record it and make my talk available. So for folks that can't be there, yeah, I'm excited that folks are going to be there. But yeah, let's dig in to
hmm.
I love this game. If anyone hasn't
Me
played
too.
this, this is worth a playthrough because it is first of all just like a beautiful game, a piece of art, and also it puts you in such a cool headspace.
Hmm.
Um, I find it very relaxing. Even the levels further on, as we will see in the narrative, that do get a little stressful. Like the overall narrative arc, I think is
Hmm.
one that is very hopeful and ecologically minded.
Mm-hmm.
And it's full of the possibility of
Yeah,
revitalization,
I think so.
which is a
Yeah,
nice thing.
you're right. Yeah.
So that
And
game company,
yeah. hmm
2000, I love that name, that game
I know.
company,
And
2009.
this was their second game, I think, after Flow,
Oh,
um,
okay.
and before Journey. So Journey, obviously, they got a lot more attention for, but this one also got like some critical acclaim. And yeah, it's in the curated by the Smithsonian American Art Museum at some point. So I always like to, I don't know,
Yeah.
when,
It was like
yeah,
the second game to be sort of added to their collection in that way,
yeah.
right? What was the first one?
I think they put two in at the same time, and I think the other one was it was either a Halo game or a something related to Halo, if I'm remembering correctly. I don't remember
Interesting.
exactly.
That is really
Yeah, I know.
interesting.
Interesting.
It's an interesting choice. Yeah,
I
I love
think.
seeing when sort of non-game, like Rochester obviously is the Strong
Yeah.
Museum is going to be
Yeah.
curating as much as they can.
Yeah.
But when these sort of like non-game museums decide like, oh, games are art, let's put this in our collection, and then figuring out how to do that. What does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Often that means you have to have source code, and then that can be proprietary and complicated. So it's really interesting, like how they choose to, or do they just have the physical objects, the
Mm-hmm.
cartridges, and
Mm-hmm.
usually it's a combination of both. So it's always interesting, like what they pick.
Yeah,
But this game, I think, is well deserved to be
I
in that
think so.
collection. So we open in a room overlooking a big city with a single wilted potted flower on the table. The window is broken. It's like stormy outside. It's gray. It's dingy. But this is actually our level selection screen. So if
Mm-hmm.
you click on the flower, it opens the first level. So it's definitely, as Elizabeth writes, encoding this environment's desolation, isolation, even in the middle of a city, and neglect. And so here's what that looks like. Oh, how pleasant. You can notice the frayed laundry hanging outside, the empty
Mm-hmm.
shelves, the walls are dirty, clearly need a
Yeah,
coat of paint.
broken windows.
Yeah,
Right.
not the greatest. And our
Yeah.
poor little flower, he has a little light
Mm-hmm.
left,
I
right?
know. Yeah.
Just hanging on. It's like somebody moved out of the apartment and like left the plant, and then
Yeah.
it's just like hanging out, like, where are you?
Mm-hmm.
Come
Very
back.
lonely.
Very lonely little flower. But
Mm-hmm.
then when we select the level, we get basically what the background of this screen looks like, or these other ones. We open on just this vibrant green field, could not be more of a contrast. So we go to a yellow flower, and then when the player presses a button, the flower blooms, a petal floats up, and then we gain control of the petal or maybe of the wind. I'm not sure
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
exactly, but
Yeah.
we then
Right.
use the petal or the wind to brush past the other flowers, and then as each of them bloom, we get another petal to kind of join our parade. So we get this trail of petals floating on the wind, and we just get these bright, saturated colors that contrast this with that opening view. So I love you write in the chapter that this level is the wilted flower's dream, or it's like escapist fantasy, and I just think that's so cute.
Mm-hmm.
I love that way of framing it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I got that partially from the description of the game on the like promotional descriptions from the company. I could look that up real quick if you want, but
Yeah, that would
that's
be really interesting.
pretty much how
How
I
you
think of
interpreted
it,
it.
as like you're kind of like embodying that city flower and its like fantasy of being somewhere else. I
Mm-hmm.
guess it could also be like a person who's living in that apartment, right, looking at the flower and then fantasizing about being somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But there aren't any like people in this game.
Right. There's nothing that cues you that it would be a person.
Right. Or it could just be, I mean, you, the player, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's true. Our fantasy, our pastoral
Our
fantasy.
fantasy. Yeah.
Yeah. So the city's soundtrack in that opening level select screen have all this kind of isolating mechanical sounds. There's no music, but then as soon as we go to the field, we get a pastoral musical score, which we'll hear some of, and sounds of wind, these kind of atmospheric effects, and then pitched tones whenever a flower blooms. And this minimalist design continues. There really isn't much text. There's a couple places where you might get told to press a button, but there's really no prompting of what to do. You sort of just figure it out. and there's no obviously anthropomorphic characters. There's no voices or faces or anything like that. We can kind of read the flower as having the petal trail as having the agency here. There's really minimal gameplay too. We control the flying and hold a button to fly forward, tilt the controller to change direction. I'd be curious how the control scheme has changed in the re-releases because I haven't played those.
Yeah.
I've only played the original.
It's also, yeah, same. So it was originally released on PS3, and I know it's also been ported to some iOS devices, and I know it's been re-released on more recent PlayStations. And I don't know how the sound changes in those different versions. So this chapter is all totally based on the original PlayStation 3 version, but I've seen like some gameplay from like some of the iOS versions, and I think they changed something about like some things about the ways that the music is triggered. So I just always like to say like this analysis might not be applicable to different versions if you're playing those. Like I think I noticed that the layers came in different orders or something. Yeah.
I think that's true of anytime there's a lot of ports, especially to mobile. It seems like things have to change just because of the nature of the platforms.
I would imagine something, yeah.
So and just, usually the most obvious level is on the layer of the control scheme, like because we don't have mouse and keyboard or we don't have the controller buttons, so you have to tap, you have to, maybe use the kind of gyroscope capability. You could still do the tilting, I imagine, but
I have no idea.
Yeah. I can't imagine what this would play like on mobile. I don't know that I'd want to play it on mobile.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I see stuff released, I'm like, I don't want that on mobile. No, thank you. Like there was at one point, there were some like Mega Man games, kind of 2D, the old ones got like ported to iPhone. And I was like, I don't want to play them that way. Tapping the screen to jump. No, thank you. But so very minimalist, and I think this is part of the immersiveness that there's nobody talking at you. There's not really a lot of text telling you what to do. You just kind of explore, and recognize, oh, this is causing things to bloom, and then sort of that must be a goal, and then you try to find the different flowers to bloom, and then you can go forward from there. But there ends up being a really clear narrative despite the lack of text. Win one for the ludologists, I guess.
Yeah.
Narrative through gameplay as opposed to narrative and then also gameplay. Where's Andrew? If Andrew's in the chat, that usually makes him happy. So this is what I decided your potential thesis was. Flowers, non-textual visuals, haptics, e.g. controller vibration, and sound are thus wholly in charge of establishing the game's virtual world and invoking the player's interactions with that world. Within this relatively sparse context, the game's rich music contributes in especially critical ways to world creation, narrative, and usability. By analyzing the music in the context of interactive gameplay and the game's other sonic, visual, and haptic components, we can gain significant insight into this game and the meanings that it might evoke. Felt like an argument.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a good summary. Yeah.
And of course, then we could also say the thesis has to do with what those meanings are, but at least in terms of something that's toward the beginning, sort of the walkthrough statement is very clearly given. There's like a section indicating analytical aims, and then it has the purpose of this chapter is to provide a close reading of Flower through an examination of the game's music. In particular, I will examine Flower's music through a lens of modularity, highlighting the ways in which separate musical components dynamically combine during gameplay and exploring the various effects such components and combinations might have in the context of the game. And then you have sort of leading questions. What sounds and combinations of sounds are possible? How likely in terms of probability those certain combinations are? And what meanings might arise from various combinations in conjunction with the game's other components? So modularity probably rings a bell.
Does for me. Yeah. I don't know.
It's very, very cited because I think folks like that it can account for the indeterminacy element of video. That was a problem from the start. A film cue is the same, it's scored to the scene, but we can have things triggered in different ways, and so it's been very difficult to figure out how to figure that out. And so you talk about these seams, like there's something in the game that causes a change in one of the sound sources, And the transition between those, or the overlap of those elements, can be very jarring. I'm thinking of like an old Mario game when you go, down a pipe and you're suddenly in the underworld. It just cuts wherever you're at, and then the next loop starts, right? There's like the pipe sound effect, and then the new one starts. But you can just have that real abrupt cut. And a lot of early like Dragon Quest games too, when you enter a new area, it's like wherever you were in the loop, it just stops and then the new one starts. So there's not really as much of a transition, but certainly as we've gone on, there's more of an attempt to smooth these out, or sometimes even use algorithmic, more procedural generation to smooth those transitions, even if the musical score is fixed at either end. Sometimes the transitions are very smartly organized. So this comes from your dissertation, right? This was, and you give a lot of examples in other games and some of your other writings. So certainly folks may have seen the Wind Waker. Who's Wind Waker? And
yeah, the 2014. Is that the pink?
I think that's in the pink book.
The pink book. The Will Gibbons, Neil Lerner, KJ Donnelly edited book.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, and this way of thinking, it hasn't. I don't know. It's just kind of clicked with my brain. So even after like I've obviously finished mining stuff for my dissertation for publications, like the new things that I tend to do, I still kind of have this in my brain. Like this is the way I think about a lot of the ways soundtracks in video games are constructed and sounding when you're playing a game. And I guess increasingly I'm most interested in, if I'm thinking about smoothness, usually like if there are multiple layers of sound happening at once, what do those sounds that are happening, are they smooth or disjunct against the score, for example? Or if there are two different pieces of music playing, like are they fitting well together, or are they standing apart? And I've been increasingly thinking about that in terms of sound effects, but that also plays very much into this chapter because of the sounds that the flowers make when they're bloomed. I mean, they're sound effects in some ways, but they're also musical tones, they're musical instrument pitches, and then you think about, what do those sounds sound like in the context of the rest of the music that you're hearing. So that's kind of what I mean in terms of, smoothness. Like you were saying, both when a piece of music stops and another one starts, how smooth is that connection between those two? And then also like the overlap of any, musical modules that are happening at the same time. Do they combine smoothly? If so, what does that mean? If not, what does that mean?
And also thinking about things like voice acted dialogue too, and like the mixing, like there have certainly been examples where like the dialogue is mixed a little too low and the score is kind of a little too loud in the moment, or things like that, where different parts of the soundscape can kind of interact with one another in more or less useful ways. And disjunction isn't a bad thing necessarily, because on some level, if you need a sound effect to communicate something to the player, you can't have it be so smooth that they don't recognize that it's a sound effect either. Right. So that it has to be distinct in some way from what's happening underneath. Obviously, the Zelda games, you're down to one heart. That bleep is like out of tune and out of phase with everything else. And that's a great example. And that's like an annoying one, and it's super disjunct on multiple levels, but it's because it's trying to be like, you are in danger.
Right, exactly.
Yep. Get a heart now. So it's communicating to you, and so it's like that emergency function kind of overtakes the desire for smoothness, whereas this one, we're confirming that we have some action here, but it still does remain distinct, as we'll get to. So smoothness this is a nice kind of redefinition if you haven't read the diss, but smoothness results from agreement or similarity between converging modules in meter, timbre, pitch, volume, or other aspects relevant to particular situations. Disjunction, by contrast, results from disagreement or difference in these aspects. So importantly, if you think of the individual elements as modules, they have seams between them, and they can be smooth in some ways but disjunct in others. So they could be metrically smooth but timbrally disjunct. melodically smooth, harmonically smooth, but metrically disjunct. So it is not an all or nothing premise here, which is the other thing that makes this a really useful framework.
Yeah, I guess I'll plug too, if someone doesn't feel like reading my whole dissertation, but you want to get like the summary of this kind of approach. I have a music theory online article that takes the basic analytical methodology and just kind of lays it out there. And there are videos and graphs and that kind of thing because it's online. And
I love
that's
MTO.
Yeah,
I want
MTO
every
is great.
publication to be MTO. Like, if everybody could just aspire to that open access with the videos.
I know.
It's so
really great.
beautifully
Yeah.
done. And of course, like
Yeah.
AMS doesn't even have that, so it's not even a standard in academia here. But it would be really nice. Yeah, let's link that really quick.
2019. It's called Analyzing Modular Smoothness in Video Game Music.
Yep,
I think. Cool.
Here's the link for anyone that wants it. It's good stuff. Okay. Yes, so we can. That's a beautiful thing to reference, but it does come up, as you've said, it's just such a useful framework. You've been able to use it for a lot of different games fruitfully, which is very cool.
I like it.
So this chapter, because we have limits of space, can't talk about every single level, so we focus here on the first level and the fifth level because they are a huge contrast with one another. And end up being useful because of how they demonstrate these concepts of combinations of tones and what the flowers are doing and all of that. So our first level has 3 main field areas. You unlock them successively by doing specific actions. Not that the game doesn't tell you that you have to bloom all the flowers over here, and then it doesn't even have that kind of like leading, like, I'm trying to think of like a 3D, game where there's like a question mark or something lit up on a map, and it's kind of like indicating with a pointer to get you there. There's nothing even like that being like, here's the spot you missed. You just have to find it.
So sometimes it does things with the way the camera moves, like especially when you first open up a new area, sometimes the camera will kind of zoom ahead and show you, okay, you should probably go this way to start.
It's pretty subtle,
like, to get you started. Yeah, but you're right. There's no like big arrow saying go do this, or like
you're 600 meters away, do
the right, or like or I'd even imagine like you could have done like a little map in the corner, like a little overview map with dots that you would need to go to. There's none of that, right? It's just kind of you're there in the world and you're just floating around and finding the things hidden in the grass,
which I like because it's not difficult. But it encourages the exploration, whereas the other one kind of removes some of the exploration if like it's revealed to you in that way. So a lot of games put that sort of, this is a high horse moment, but a lot of games kind of put all of these features in just because other games do, and there's sort of an, like, let's have an open world and let's put the mini map and let's do all these things with the HUD, and eventually it's like, well, do we need that?
Yeah.
Joe, my husband, when he first played Breath of the Wild, and he was like, oh, cool, this is like this massive map and it's all about exploration. And then he climbed up a tower the first time and that whole section, the mini map, got revealed. He got mad because he was like, well, is the game about exploration or is the game about the achievement of getting the towers and revealing?
That's really interesting. Yeah.
And he felt like that removed some of the, if the game is about exploration, it's almost like kind of mixed signaling the player in that sense. And he was like, that kind of takes some of the magic away. And he's like, now in like an Assassin's Creed game, they have that mechanic too, right? You climb the tower, it reveals some of the map. And he's like, but that one was more like kind of ludically intertwined with the structure of the game where you are trying to like do reconnaissance and get the lay of the land. And so he's like, it makes sense there. But so he didn't end up playing much of Breath of the I was the one that did the 300 hours in Breath of the Wild, but he kind of lost steam on it as soon as that happened. So.
Well, with the idea of exploration and them leaving so much up to the player in Flower, I recall my very first experience with Flower loading up the game. I think I did nothing in the first half hour because I didn't figure out, because it said, the little instruction says hold any button, or press any button. Or maybe it's hold every button. But I didn't realize that you had to keep holding the button to move forward. It took me about half an hour to even figure out the basic movement mechanic. So actually there was that like little bit of a barrier, and if I hadn't kept trying, just because I liked the idea, or I liked the music I was hearing, or something made me keep trying, I could have never played Flower.
Yeah.
If that hadn't been enough. But
so
yeah,
there can be a point where it's too subtle, or it's sort of like not teaching you.
Yeah, right.
There's a classic Aaron Hansen of Game Grumps Let's Play fame on YouTube. He did a series of kind of animated kind of game critiques called Sequelitis. And it's usually about like critiquing later examples in a franchise. But he talks about Mega Man games and how, especially the early ones, did a really nice job of, there's no pop-up, there's no one going, Mega Man, do this. You know, instead it's like they introduce the platforms that disappear and reappear in a room where the floor is there, and you're like, oh, okay, I have to time these jumps, and then in the next room suddenly there's a pit and you have to navigate over the pit. So it's like they introduce like gradually the concept to you, and it's totally natural. So there can be too much subtlety, but there can also be like a little bit over hitting you over the head with like tutorializing.
Yeah,
like
right.
Let's explain everything to you. Sometimes you don't need it all explained to you. And honestly, there are games where like when there are, especially like modern games where there's so many buttons, I don't remember what they all do, and they're like giving me all that information at once. Like I want it a little more scaffolded.
Yeah. I kind of think of this first level of Flower as the tutorial level, because it sets up all the basic gameplay mechanics, but again, it doesn't do any of it explicitly.
Yeah.
And it also sets up like the basic structure of how music and sound works in this game, and like what kinds of cues you can get from that.
Yeah.
And how it sets the mood and all of that. But yeah, I think of it as a tutorial level. It's also a little shorter than some of the other levels. This first level is. It just kind of sets up the basic idea of the game.
Yeah. So we end up having to bloom some red flowers in a patch of brown grass that unlocks the second field. And then the second field has more brown patches that we try to revitalize the area and then open the third field. But each one is distinct in terms of the score and the different musical and sonic layers, which is what the image depicts. But we will go through what those are here. So we are in a diatonic D major pitch collection. Totally
Lovely
ambiguous.
D major.
Yeah, beautiful. D major, as a string player, D major is like total home to me because it's the first key you learn to play in. So
amazing.
Yeah, it feels very like fifth grade learning how to do a scale, you know. D becomes our tonal center. I think D or like C would work really well, or maybe B flat, like thinking of instruments and what their first things are.
Right.
So yeah, the level soundtrack begins with only the first layer of the first field, which is an acoustic guitar part, which is arpeggiating open fourths for 6 measures. Don't worry, there is a beautiful transcription. It's also why I'm a fan of your work. I love a good transcription. And then it relaxes into the outline of D major triad, and then at measure 16, the process begins again with the initial open fourths arpeggio. The first layer loops continuously, yielding gentle undulations on both a small scale, note-to-note arpeggios, and a large scale, BEA to ADA and back, reinforcing the environment's calm, pastoral quality. So there's...
Yeah, and this is all with like the wind, like the grass is waving in the wind, and like, I don't know, I feel like it all kind of works together.
Slows down your breathing a little bit. Like you're just like, huh.
Yeah, exactly. I've read so many comments of people saying like I play this game to relax. Like I play this game to feel some sort of different feeling, right? Like that kind of relaxing or emotional, release.
Yeah. And then we gradually get these other layers. The strings enter, a piano enters. You can see how kind of sparse, minimalist the score is. And in this first field anyway, they're synchronized with each other. So this is a neat thing to note. The individual layers can fade into the soundtrack at any time, but the three instrumental parts can combine in only one way. So it does follow your actions, but it's vertically kind of locked. So, if you're in measure 2 here and you're triggering layer 3, you'll hear it here. You won't hear it early. So everything is very lined up.
I think of it as just basically like a mix, and you're just fading in new elements of the mix. I assume everything's probably playing all at the same time, and it's just some layers are muted at first, and then you would kind of fade them in. That's my guess anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense. Our second field, though, goes from 3 to 7. 7 loops. Whoa. Gets big.
It gets really thick and very rich.
Orchestral.
I don't know
almost.
if romantic is the right. Well, but it's like it gets towards an more orchestral sound rather than like kind of the chamber-y sound of the first field.
Like a little less intimate, a little more epic. But
there you go.
But still pastoral, still relaxing. So our first layer is actually kind of a double layer here in that it's piano with a ostinato bass. And then successively from there, we add bassoon, guitar, clarinet, cello, strings, and horn, and they all enter in smooth combinations. So both of the fields are having the same effect. It's just there's kind of a change in scale. So single piece of music, it grows in instrumental thickness as well as melodic and rhythmic complexity as the player explores and interacts with the environment at his or her own pace. And the music only goes forward. So let's say you're in field 2 and you're like, I'm going to go back to field 1. You can do that, but the music doesn't switch. It doesn't go, okay, we're going to go back to field 1. It only ever moves forward, or, it stays in field 2's music. The switch from field 1 to field 2 itself is pretty smooth. So there's a whooshing wind sound effect that can kind of help mask that seam a little bit. The pitches do largely agree because we're still in this kind of D diatonic major pitch space. You can even have a rhythmic continuation that seems even more seamless, but rare. So but either way, it ends up sounding like an outgrowth of the previous music because of these other elements being really smooth. But absolutely, a player could just have that serendipity of having it show up where you're like, oh, it just goes right into the next one.
Right. Yeah. I think it's interesting.
Field 2 to field 3, though. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say they're definitely, I guess they didn't choose to or build in the structure in this game to make sure that the rhythms and the meters always synced up, changing from the first to the second field. I mean, there are other games that do that kind of thing when you're switching between areas and the music has to change. So I think it's kind of interesting that, again, I don't know if that was something they considered and decided not to do, or if it's something that just didn't really come up. But I think it's kind of interesting that it's left up to chance. Like, you could be playing the game and there could be this extremely smooth transition between these two areas, or it could be a little more offset, like a little bit of a disjunction as you're going from one place to another. But ultimately, yeah, you're right. It's all D major. There's some instrumental, like the piano there's the piano in the first field. There's still piano in the second field. Yeah.
And I think that's the idea of not having the transition point implemented to have that type of smoothing out. I think that depends a lot on the sort of capabilities of the sound designers and composers specifically. Right. If you have a really big studio, they have a separate implementation team that is probably specifically going to take those moments and like figure out how to get from point A to point B. But if it's more of an indie title, then you may have a composer that is finding ways to have these transitions be pretty smooth, but then it ultimately is going to just switch modules. So
yeah.
Of course, another way we could have dealt with this was just have the same track for the whole level 1 too, and then there would never be that. You could still just do the fade in, fade out. So just a lot of different ways to do this. I think it's definitely not something where we have moved to only ever having like algorithmic transitions, where there's procedural ways to smooth it out. There are still plenty of moments where something might have a little bit of disjunction, and like I've noticed this since reading this article, like moments where, oh, there's that little wind sound effect or something, like kind of covering it up.
Yeah, to cover it up, right? Yeah.
There are a lot of times where something gets introduced that does that, which I think is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But
good.
field 2 to field 3, we do get a pretty big change. Bigger contrast both visually and musically. So by the end of field 2, we've got all 7 layers. It's very thick. It's very triumphant. You clear that last patch of flowers, though, instead of getting like da 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 da, the music ends up falling silent, and then you get transitioned over to an entirely brown field with a bare tree at the center. So it's like, whoa, uh-oh.
Yeah.
This is
Big
not
uh-oh.
good. So we lose our stability, we lose our momentum because everything just falls silent. And then when we do get the 1-layer loop, it sounds very tentative. And it does not have this layering effect. It does not grow. So we will... Sorry, I hear my little one coming back in. She went on a long walk. We'll take a look at a little bit of gameplay in a minute, but the flower blooming tones are sort of the next layer to consider, which is neat that it's not just a single tone per color of flower. There's a mixture of choices that we can go to. So the figures end up showing all the possible tones for each color of flower. So let's see, 43.8 is the white flowers in the guitar, and notice they have their own instruments as well. 43.9 is the yellow flowers, and they're on xylophone, and they're real high. Violin for the red flowers, and they actually have 2 tones, so they have a violin and then a glass harmonica for like a resonance.
That's my best description of that sound. I don't actually know if if that's what they were going for, but it sounds to me like this kind of crystalline, like resonant sound, different from the violin attack. So you get like this attack moment and then kind of a resonant sound. Yeah. And from what I can tell, I'm not certain, I think the guitar samples for the white flower tones, I think it's the same sampling library as the guitar that's in the looping music in the score.
Makes sense.
So there's some parts where I mentioned like that sometimes you can be blooming flowers, and the combination between the flower sound and the score can be so smooth that the sound just disappears into the score. Like it becomes interpolated into it, like you're kind of, what you're doing is becoming part of the score. Which kind of from a usability standpoint doesn't make a lot of sense, because it's like, well, I kind of just lost that feedback sound from blooming the flower. But the white flowers never do anything ludically important in the level. They're kind of just like, they're there. It's only the yellow flowers and the red flowers that actually let you progress through the level. So I'm kind of thinking like, like the white flowers are great, and they help you build this nice long pretty tail, but they don't have anything like ludically important happening with them. So
it's okay if they like, we don't need that information communication function, so it's okay that it sort of melds.
Sometimes it really melds in. Sometimes you can't even really tell that you did it, by ear.
I love that.
But it's so cool because it also is like really just building right into the score music. Yeah.
And you'll notice here, this all agrees pretty beautifully with that D major. We've got our F sharps, got our Ds. And there are notes that I guess you could read as more like passing tones, but like it's pretty connected. So we have these pentatonic collections.
Nice pentatonic collections, yep.
So we
like those.
They're going to lead to a lot of consonant intervals and repeating pitch classes. So blooming multiple flowers of the same color at the same time or in succession produces tones that readily group together to form chords or motifs, which can effectively form a new layer on top of the score. And these are unpredictable, even though the flowers appear in the same locations. You're not going to trigger them. It's not like a rail shooter, where you're kept at the, one of those run and guns where you're kind of like a constant speed. You're going to kind of weave your way through, and so you're going to trigger them in different points. But they have this possibility of being incredibly smooth with everything else. But I love that each flower doesn't have the same tone over and over again. So it has that sort of capriciousness that there's a set that they can pick from. And this was the part that was really, really stunning to me, is that each flower has a memory. A
Yeah, I
capacity
learned
to
that from
remember.
talking with, so I emailed the composer when I was doing this stuff because you can email people if they're still alive.
Yes.
Um, and this was something that he shared with me. Like I didn't have access to the code or anything, but he mentioned that, yeah, like you quoted here, there's coding within each of the for each of the flowers that they can remember a certain number of, or up to a certain number of previous flower tones, and then their behavior is guided by those previous sounds. So there's some moments where you'll like go down a string of flowers down a hillside, and they all have long memories, so they all remember the previous ones, and they're set so that they remember the previous ones and they don't repeat the previous ones.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a little not 12 tone, because it's not it's not atonal, but it's like, okay, I've just gone through the set, okay, I'm going to repeat the set again. So you get a little repeating pattern that you can hear and that you can pick up on. So a little motif that builds itself, and it's different every time you play because the starting notes are randomly generated, and then it just builds on itself, which is super cool. I love it.
Yeah, and I like your interpretation too. It's like, okay, so if they have memory, this is also a way that the flowers get kind of anthropomorphized by these
Yeah.
tones. They're given this voice, but then they also have community with one another, which is a big theme in this game.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Nice contrast with the lonely flower at the beginning, right? The
Yeah.
flowers in the field are able to like essentially communicate with each other, like
Mm-hmm.
build these larger structures, and like sometimes they'll happen in little clumps, so you'll bloom them and you'll get a chord, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it and since they're a pentatonic collection, it'll pretty much be mostly consonances, or maybe a major second or something in there.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, and so it's like, oh, they're working together, and oh, it sounds pretty.
And it revitalizes brown patches, at least in
Yes.
this
And
level.
so,
So there's
right,
that sense of
visually,
like
yeah.
they're working together to make sure that this space is as full of life as it can be.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a beautiful space to be in.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
then we take the flower tones. Let's look at how they interact with the score. So we have a beautiful table here showing that volume, meter, and pitch are smooth relatively. There is timbral disjunction
Mm-hmm.
that keeps the flowers in their own layer. But again,
Yeah.
that possibility of smoothness makes it seem like the flowers are adding to the soundtrack, and then the white flowers in particular can really meld in.
Yeah.
So they remain distinct in some ways, but they really do agree. The volume is 100%, so completely agree in volume. So it's not like we're like, hello, you're blooming a flower.
Yeah. I didn't mention in this that it does, like the mixing levels, the volume does change if you go very slow. Like if you stop moving fast, if you just kind of let go of your move button, the the score kind of fades to the background and the visuals get all fuzzy and you kind of just float a little bit, but you can still be going past flowers at that point. So in those moments, you might get a little bit like loud. Maybe the flower tones might stand out a little more, but I feel like that's not, well, it's not the core gameplay
Right.
mechanic and all that good stuff. But yeah, yep.
So here's a little bit of
Cool. And this is from
gameplay.
the
This is from
PlayStation
the
5.
yeah. So I specifically chose the PlayStation 5 just because it was upscaled to 4K, so I thought it would look pretty.
Yeah, I'm sure it'll be beautiful. I'm very curious again to hear. Yeah, I'll just
To
see
hear
if I
like this
notice
person's
anything.
long play, and yeah, we'll see if it
Yeah.
actually ends up contradicting everything we just said.
Yeah, I know. Right. Yeah, I'm just curious. It might all be the same. I don't know. I love this game.
So I believe I started right on the field.
Yeah.
I definitely read this as the sad little apartment flower.
So there is another layer that just added there that wasn't in my chart, and it's the wind sound. So before you bloom the flower, there's this like wind that adds in when you bloom it. Right, and there are the strings the second layer, and then this should be the third layer with piano. Yeah.
They had that little chord together.
Yeah, this person's playing very carefully. They're trying to get all the flowers.
That's kind of how I play a lot of times.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it makes it then the score is kind of coming to the foreground and going back again, because every time you slow down, the score kind of fades to the back, which is interesting.
How wonderful is that moment? Just the greening of the field.
It's those flowers that make a motif with long memories. Did you hear it starting to happen?
Oh, so good. Yeah, so we can see these brown patches like, oh no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh no, I know. But we're able to make them better, and the music grows every time you do. It's like a lot of positive reinforcement, I think.
Which is probably why people say this game is like so feels good to play, it's so relaxing, like
yeah.
There's a lot of positive feedback happening. Okay, I can just watch this whole game, but we will continue on for now. So
seriously.
Beautiful illustration there, that the flower sounds smooth with the score and volume, sometimes meter, frequently pitched, blah, blah, blah. The temporal disjunction, just keep them in their own layer. We said that. But then the city apartment, after completing this level, has some improvements, which is kind of fun that we don't leave the level select screen kind of in the same state. The leaking faucet, which you hear, you don't see, obviously, in the image I had shown. The window's been repaired. The leaking faucet's been repaired, so we don't hear the leak anymore. There's some books on the shelves. There are clean blinds. The frayed laundry is gone. And there's a mark on the little calendar off to the left to kind of indicate you've completed the first level, or like the passage of time. And the yellow flower's no longer wilted. Yay! And now there's a second pot with another flower, which is, of course, our second level.
Yeah.
It's still gray. But
it is.
Like it's showing some signs of life, right? Mm-hmm. Like we've got
those
little
happy little characters on the calendar.
Yeah, it's like we've added some stickers or something. There's a couple books and
yeah, it's better, right?
It's better, and it'll keep getting better. So the apartment in the city continues to improve as you play through the other levels, and the levels build on that same gameplay and musical mechanic as the first. And then, so in this way, those two worlds are sort of influencing each other and beginning to meld. The apartment begins to add sounds of life. We start hearing cicadas and crickets. And then the dreamscape starts to gain some human-made structures, like windmills. But toward the end of level 4, which is that's the night level, I think, right? The human-made structures start to become a little menacing. There's sparking electricity, there's a red light, and the score adds a module that is chromatic and non-tonal and a lot less metrically clear. So,
Yeah.
And then level 5 is full-on nightmare. So at this point, I guess the city has kind of infected. But let's see this sort of gradual improvement. So we finally got our color back in level 3. And you can see there's a fan now, and there's like a couple decorative elements. So things are gradually improving. The nighttime scene.
Oh, yeah.
And then the colors washed out because of the brightness. Then we get to level 5. So dreams and nightmares. Here's the nightmare. We get thunder and lightning. We get twisted electrical metal sculptures that can harm our trail of petals, which is terrifying. They electrify them and burn some of them away. So the player can't die, but the notion of harm and danger is pretty strong, especially given everything that's led up to this. Being about revitalization and being able to like recover those brown patches and turn them green. Here, when we bloom flowers, we can cut the power supply to those metal sculptures, but you have to navigate pretty carefully to them. And then, because, you don't want to lose petals and get hurt by them. And even so, they don't heal the ground anymore. It only cuts the power and makes the structures no longer dangerous. So, it shifts things where the goal is now survival. We're not trying to restore or heal anymore. We're just trying to get through it.
Yeah, I honestly this is like I don't play a lot of scary games, so maybe this doesn't mean this much, but this is definitely like the most scared I've been like playing a game. Like like I think that's one of the reasons why this game has stuck with me so much is that it has such, for me anyway, a strong contrast between the feelings of playing these levels that are so peaceful and joyful and fun and the like terror of playing this level where it's like you have to do something. Like you have to keep playing, you have to bloom these flowers, but they're like right next to these structures, and if you touch the structure you get this electrical shock. Like obviously not you don't, but the controller shakes.
Yeah.
And like the screen shakes, everything goes red, there's a loud sound, and yeah, things burn away and it's terrifying.
Yeah, it's so effective. And again, there's no text, there's
And
no
yeah,
characters
there's no text,
explicitly
there's no
doing this.
characters. Yeah, it's just like a really close, like, well, I mean, I guess immersion would be the way to put it, but like it's all very, very engaging. I don't know, it really, really got to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And looking at the music here is useful. That the score is, of course, adding to this effect too. The score is incredibly chromatic. It's often atonal, asymmetrical. It neither loops nor layers until the final portion, and it also has periods of extensive silence, including starting in silence. So really not what we're used to. So we have, let's see, 43 third.
Yeah,
So we have the
Andrew.
modular structure. I kind of just threw these all on here so they fit on one slide. So we silence module 1, silence module 2, silence. That's our modular structure. And there's the arrow here from 1 to 2. Can we leap over that middle silence depending on how we play?
Yeah, it's just like each of those two modules happen when this is like a part of the game where you're going down this valley, and when you go past a point in the valley it triggers the first module, and when you go past another point it triggers the second module. So if you go in a pretty straight line and don't linger, then yeah, you won't get that silence in the middle. It'll just cut from one to the other.
Andrew said note to self, avoid
Yeah,
sending
I
Elizabeth
know.
game recommendations, all the horror that he's been working on lately.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Andrew.
This is why, it's like you learn who in the field like kind of has your taste almost. There are folks that I can kind of reliably count on that if they loved a game and they're telling me about it, I'm gonna like it too. Elizabeth Hamilton is one of them. I love a lot of the games that Elizabeth has brought into my life, and Kate Galloway too has brought a lot of really good games into my life. So because I definitely I lean more on that kind of like slow gamer. Like I like exploratory spaces. I like, chill gameplay. And it doesn't mean that I like things easy, because as folks know, I'm also big on like old school Mega Man platforming, and like so it's not that I need it to necessarily be easy gameplay. I kind of prefer these more open-ended structures. I think it's very telling that the first game that I ever bought with my own money was the Super Nintendo Harvest Moon.
Oh.
And it was because,
excellent.
and this is actually a very recent acquisition in my life. I had read about it in a Nintendo Power where they did like a whole retrospective on it. Joe found it and he got it for me on eBay.
Oh.
So
Oh my
I
gosh.
remember I was like 10 years old, or whenever this came out. And let's see if I can find the actual section where it goes into this. It was just like magic to me. I had never seen anything like that in a video game before. And I had been playing since I was pretty little. My brother brought home the Nintendo when I was 5. But it was this whole long extended section on it, which I'm amazed that I'm not finding. Earthbound 64 was also being advertised. Here's a little bit of, so it's got like the color maps, and like it kind of takes you, it's a pretty decent guide to all the different seasons, all the different areas. It tells you the price list for like what the crops sell for. And I read this. It's several, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 pages, 6 whole pages of stuff.
Nice.
Good old Nintendo Power style. But yeah, Joe, we figured out which one it was in, and Joe found it on eBay.
That is so great.
I love
Yeah.
it. But that says a lot, that game really sparked my imagination as a kid, because it felt like you could kind of do anything. It's also why Stardew Valley is such a favorite of mine, because that's a love letter to everything Harvest Moon represented,
Yeah.
But yeah, They,
Yeah.
it's not that I never play horror games or like first person shooters, but I'm really bad at them. So I kind of prefer like Joe play them and I watch. Like he recently, fairly recently, did Spec Ops: The Line, which I'm really glad that I got to see it almost cinematically, because I probably would not have been like competent enough to finish the game. At least it would have taken me a really, really long time to do it, because that's just not my style of gameplay that I'm very used to. But I always have undergrads in my classes that like that game really was meaningful to them. It meant something. You know, folks that played a lot of shooters, that one has a lot of sort of commentary in the middle and deconstruction of the genre, where it's kind of like, what am I doing here? And I got to see that, and now I have this understanding and appreciation. But like, man, I couldn't have played that myself. So yes, the white phosphorus sequences, that'll stick with you. It's pretty intense. But anyway, back to our scary, other kind of scary. You know, it's perfect. We're doing this in Halloween season.
Yeah.
So here's where this game gets Halloween-y. We have the excerpts here that show you like the kind of asymmetrical, like even just plotting this in kind of a 4/4, like you can see it just kind of continues in a very random way.
Yeah. Do you want to know my process for transcribing that?
Yes.
I think it was, well, definitely making guesses and writing stuff down, and then having this in Finale and pushing play on Finale and pushing play on my recording at the same time and seeing if I'd basically lined it up. So that's how I did it. It's totally not exact, but it's pretty close. And there's like rubato in there that I didn't account for, or maybe that's where like that measure of 5/4, like maybe that's coming out of some really severe rubato or something like that. But it's pretty close.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to get as close of a representation in the transcriptions as I could with the tools that I had, because then that's how I was doing the like percentages calculations later for how likely it is that if something was happening at that time, you know, what kind of interval is it going to create, that kind of thing.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. But I mean, obviously there's probably other methods that would involve directly working with the sound itself rather than having to first transcribe it into Finale.
Right. But that would also require access to probably like, I don't know if FMOD, you know, like whatever it was in. You would probably need some kind of source file to really be able to see that in like a DAW. You know, when I work on early game music, I can do a lot of the same thing, but I also will then take like an NSF file, which you know, it's a fan-made rip. It's not necessarily perfect, so I like to do multiple sources if I can. But I can open that up in a tracker and then kind of see exactly what frame stuff enters on, and that's a good way to check like my rhythmic. But a lot of the time, I just do what you do, and I use the trackers more for confirmation. But I think that has to do with just like my skill set and my training. Like I do a lot of transcribing, even for like string quartets. A bride wants a Taylor Swift song, and there's not necessarily going to be a piano vocal score if it's a brand new song. So I have to just kind of get it down, figure out what the chord progression is, you know, and then create whatever parts so they can walk down the aisle to it. So.
Yeah, you do a lot of transcription. Yep, between video game stuff and arranging for weddings.
Heck yeah.
That's great.
Or, you know, Machine Gun Kelly occasionally. as I did a couple months back. That was wild. That was also wild because I had less than a 48-hour turnaround on those.
Ooh. Yikes.
So it was just like wouldn't it be cool if the kids could join him on stage? And, you know, they paid me, no worries. It's not like I did this out of the goodness of my heart, but I mean, I also thought that was cool. But yeah, the video before or after he was emo. After, because one of the songs I did was Emo Girl. Which was so weird to me. I don't know how much y'all know Machine Gun Kelly, but it was really weird to me because when I heard Emo Girl, I felt like I was back in like 2004 in high school when that music was first really popular. He nailed that kind of like pop punk emo sound.
Yeah.
And it was a little uncanny for me to like have this be a much newer song, but it sounded exactly like some of the things people listened to when I was in high school. I wasn't a big fan of like emo as a kid, but Uncanny stuff. But anyway, I love hearing about the transcription process because there's often this kind of imperfect translation that we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's times to do more of like a, this type of graphical representation versus necessarily needing to have it notated. But like usually there's a reason. Like I don't just notate things. Well, I do sit down and do transcriptions for fun as well. But usually if I'm going to put one in a chapter, like there's a reason that I'm trying to kind of do that translation with the acknowledgement that there could be things that don't translate exactly. So, yeah.
And part of the reason why the part of the transcription for this project too was because I was feeding the finale files into Music 21 Python code to run programs for me to calculate things that I wanted it to calculate. So there was like both transcription so that you could you could see it in musical score, but also so that the programs that I was working with would understand what the music was doing, that I wanted it to answer questions
chickens.
about.
Did you code those?
I did. So yeah, but
amazing.
Music 21 is a super cool toolkit, and I haven't used it in a little while, so I hope it's still active.
Wow.
Yeah, but it's like, just because basically, like, if I wanted to say, okay, so here's a note, here's a pitch that could happen at any time over the score. I don't want to go through and count and determine every single moment myself. I could, but it would take a long time, and it would be easier if I just had a way to have the computer do it for me. So that was part of what I did too.
That's amazing. Man,
but then it means that you have to go through and do these careful transcriptions that are pretty close to. So again, if there was a way to get the same kind of analysis without that in between phase where you're right, you lose a little bit of information, you lose a little bit of detail. Transcription is not the same as what you're actually listening to. So yeah,
well, one of my classic examples in my like Dr. Mario chapter in my dissertation, there's gestures that are basically glissandos. But of course, if you open up a tracker, you can see exactly how many frames per note as it slides down, right? So do you notate that as like a big tuplet run? Or do you just say, it's a gliss?
That's a great point.
And so depending on what I need that example for, I might want one or the other.
Right.
So I have kind of a digression in the middle of that chapter where I give kind of two versions of, I think it was the fever track, might have been chills, either way. I give both versions to show like for some audiences and for some purposes I might want it to look kind of more like music we are used to seeing as musicians, so the glissando makes sense, but there could be a time where I want to know exactly how things are divided, and I'm often interested in sort of how chips are allocated and stuff. So I usually do both.
Different tools for different kinds of questions that you want to ask. Yeah,
exactly.
And situations. Yep.
This is why Julianne says that I'm a secret theorist. She's like, you're always transcribing things. I don't make charts though. I think that's the dividing line. If I made more charts, then I think I would officially be called a theorist.
That's pretty funny.
So both of these modules that create the terror, a lot of the terror comes from the unpredictability, and both in their frequently unique rhythms and contours, fluctuating pulse streams. There's heavy rubato, there's wandering chromaticism, and they don't loop. And the musical module switches are no longer triggered. This I think is even more striking to me as a player, that no longer are the musical switches triggered by something I'm doing in the environment. So they feel random. They don't feel like, oh, I'm progressing. I just like revitalize this area. And you can't change the brown spots anymore in this level. Yeah.
The experience is more just kind of like, why did that flute just start playing?
Right.
Like, it's like, I didn't do anything. Is something happening? No, nothing's happening. It's the way this level is structured very differently musically from the other ones, which is unsettling.
Yeah. That's happened to me in the first time I played an Assassin's Creed game, which was Origins. I was pretty late to that party, but it was Egypt, so of course I did. But there would be moments where I would be like, uh-oh, because I would hear something in the score, but it wasn't actually like a danger trigger necessarily. It would be like you were entering, a particular area, like things would sound more menacing than they actually were. And it took me a while to like learn how to parse it to be like, oh wait, that's the danger cue and not just kind of a generic, like
I see.
tense area we're sneaking
Huh.
around kind of cue. There were moments like that where I went, uh-oh, something new. Like I
Yeah.
was primed to think that meant that I needed to hide or that there was danger, and
Yeah.
often there wasn't.
You're too well acclimated to the music telling you things,
Yeah,
and
but at the same
they were
time,
a little
like
too heavy-handed with whatever
at the same time,
whatever
not
tension they were
acclimated
trying.
enough to like other Assassin's Creed games or maybe other games in that style, because
Hmm.
I for a long time hadn't played anything like more modern than like Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, or PlayStation 2. Really, those were kind of like where I stopped because it just couldn't afford to keep up with consoles. And so then going back and playing some of these things, it was like there was all of this kind of like game literacy that I had missed out on. And
I
so, like,
see.
learning how to operate in a 3D space, Breath of the Wild was actually a big
Yeah.
teacher for me on that, where I was like, oh, I can kind of move properly. But yeah, unintended affective zones, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was like very sensitive to sound because that's what I do. But sometimes in modern gaming, like that doesn't actually work because I'm like not
Mm,
attuned in the right ways, depending
very
on the game.
interesting.
So yeah, Joe's always interested when he sees me reacting to stuff. He's like, I feel like you're hearing it differently than me, and like in a way
Mm,
that's true, because he's hearing it very like ludically.
mm.
And he's a programmer, so like he appreciates a lot of the like constructedness of things. But yeah, even watching movies, like I'll go, ooh, I'll catch little things in a different way. But this is the effect here is that nothing is predictable, and so therefore it's uncomfortable. It's unsettling, and the flower tones get in on this action too. They have chromatic notes, so we don't have that pentatonicism anymore. We also have microtones between the pitches.
Yeah.
Uh
That's
oh.
also why I really like this level. It's like they just really went all in on the sound and the music and how can we be as different sounding from
Mm-hmm.
the beginning as possible? Well, detune the pitches. Like it's really striking.
Yeah,
Also, playing this with musicians is really fun because they'll like flinch. They're, oh,
they can really hear that. And again,
oh,
like microtones like are very cool, but
huh.
like it's the setting here where we are putting them against
Yeah,
the non-microtonal background,
right.
that we end up getting this crunch, this extra like detuning element where it just
Hmm.
feels off to us.
Yeah,
So it's not like microtonal in itself is necessarily like bad or a
yeah, I
problem. It's
agree.
that we're not in a microtonal context, and so that
Yeah.
we're getting that disjunction really working here.
Yeah, that's important to point out. Yeah, really, very, very much so. Because the background music, right, the score here is still using the 12 chromatic pitches,
Yeah,
tuned in 12 tone equal temperament and all
yeah,
that good stuff. It's chromatic, it's not diatonic like it was before, but it's still at least tuned in a similar system. And then the flower tones are the things that are very audibly detuned a lot of the time. Um, yeah.
yeah. So if you're listening to like kind of mid 20th century microtonal experiments where the whole work is in microtones, like it's not like,
Which I love.
oh yeah, I love me some like Harry Parch, right? 42
Oh,
tones to
yes.
the
Yes,
octave. Are you
please.
kidding me?
Oh my
But
gosh.
that
Love
doesn't
it.
like
I love her.
scare you necessarily. It might sound a little
Right.
strange if you're not used to it, but it's like the piece still is like internally coherent.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's nothing wrong with the microtones per se, and certainly if you're listening to like systems where microtonality is a part of the scale structure, like Hindustani music or um,
Hmm.
what else was I thinking of? Some of the Arabic maqams, like there's going to be microtonal
Oh,
inflections
sure.
within individual scales that totally work, but it's all about context here.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
the wider pitch set means, because we have all these chromatic notes available, this also means that we are a lot less likely to produce consonances or repeated tones. And then the microtones mean they're often out of tune with the score. So now, if we read the music as sort of representing the flowers' agency, their voice, their community, the fact
Hmm.
that we have all of this disjunction happening, they're no longer like relating to each other or to the environment in the same way. So they can't produce that pentatonic vocabulary that we had, and they're much more likely to be very chaotic. They don't sound together. They aren't this like kind of choir of pedals anymore, which is scary.
Yeah.
There are moments where it might be in tune, and we might have some agreement. But I like here you acknowledge that that's a possibility, but you say that it's more tantalizing than reassuring, like shadows of the idyllic agreement and support in previous levels that is now all but lost in this corrupted environment. What a downer.
Yeah. I know.
Let's hear a little bit of it.
Yeah.
Everyone,
Is this from the beginning of the level then?
Not quite the very beginning, but
okay.
Because I wanted to find a moment where there was a zap.
Oh yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, there's a I'll tell you later.
It's a dark and stormy night.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, so you have to like the flowers are all in the power towers here.
Yeah, I don't like even watching this.
Definitely gives that creepy vibe.
Yeah. It's like I know.
Ooh, there it is.
I know that'll happen.
Do you want me to find the beginning of the level? Because this is just the whole thing.
No, I was just gonna say that there's a trophy for getting to this level without getting zapped, and that's the one trophy that I don't have, that I can't get. It's like
you just want to get the level over with.
Yeah, well, it's like I can't do it. I can't get through this without
it's difficult
accidentally touching something. Yeah, the flowers are so close to the danger structures.
Yeah. And it's not like you have like 100% control over the trail either. So can't the trail kind of brush past?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I think it's just the main flower. If it touches, then I think.
Yeah.
But even so, like your control is only so much. Like you know, are you actively moving forward? Are you turning? But like you can still drift. Like it's.
Yeah.
It's just hard.
Sometimes you just decide, no, I don't want that. I don't want that trophy. I don't want that achievement. There's definitely Steam games. One of them, Stardew Valley comes up again, but one of them is going the Joja like corporate route. Like instead of buying seeds from the local general store, like you just go all in and you buy a Joja membership. And like the whole point of the game is to like resist the like mega corporation. And so like I know the completionist wants to do that, but you'd have to devote a whole save to that route. In the other one, you complete the community center and it gets turned into this like beautiful space where everyone can gather. You like fix it up. It starts out really dilapidated, and then like these little magical forest creatures help you fix it up, and it's great. In the other route, if you do the Joja, you buy a membership, like a Costco membership to Joja. But then at the end of that route, you just buy all of the upgrades, and then that community center gets turned into a warehouse for them. And so it's just like, nope, I don't need that achievement.
Exactly.
Are you kidding me? Like the whole game is about getting out of that.
Yeah. And
having this beautiful farm that I build and this community that I'm a part of. And so, yeah, there's definitely achievements where I'm, no, thank you. So it doesn't end us in this terrifying nightmare. We get to wake up from the nightmare there, which is,
this is good.
I like the narrative arc here. It isn't this like, okay, everyone, everything is eventually going to be awful in the end. Level 6. The final level, we can restore the environment and get rid of the twisted metal structures, which causes a choral burst that often agrees with D major. So very triumphant, very hallelujah chorus. We get reconciliation. The trees join colorful buildings, highways, grass, and then our apartment has human voices for the first time of children playing. We hear jazz musicians, maybe like outside on the street somewhere. So at the conclusion of the narrative, we're able to bridge this gap and have urban spaces that also include nature. And so narrative care, community, and life triumph over corruption and isolation, both for the flowers on the table and the apartment's unseen human inhabitants. And that's what it looks like in the end. Look at that. Isn't that nice? And you can see we've had all the marks on the calendar now.
Mm-hmm.
So we are good.
Yeah.
It's just such a nice place to end up.
I know. I like it. It sometimes I'm like, oh, is it too cheesy? Like we have to have the big redemptive finale. But then I'm like, no.
No.
It's great. No, it's really great. It's just like go to a really dark place and then we get this really big because you get to like actively destroy the things that were trying to destroy you. Yeah. And you get really triumphant music, and it's very nice. It's very nice.
Well, and it's nice too that like it's sort of, if we think about this as like an environmental, like climate change metaphor too, it suggests that there is a way out that is through, that like there is a possibility that like you don't have to suddenly tear down all the urban spaces and reforest everything, but that there might be like ways to have more environmentally friendly design, or that like, people having those like living rooftops where they're like growing gardens, or like there's solar panels, like you can think that there's ways that we can actually bridge the technological solutions with the natural world, and like not have it be such an antagonistic relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that comes through pretty clear in this game. It, like you said, it's a very like hopeful kind of thesis that it doesn't have to be stark, desolate city versus some sort of idyllic pastoral field, right? In the end, it can be nature and city life, or people and nature, and it's pretty nice.
Yeah, it's a good game. If y'all haven't played it, you really should. Oh wait, I think this may be a clip of the apartment coming back to life.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's a little jazz.
Yeah, I really like that detail, that because this scene has never had music in it before. So there's this little detail of like, oh, here's some like actual, people are making music. And then they're going to do the credits, which is a whole other level that is apparently really complex in its music and its design. And I haven't thought about it at all. I just know that I've read the developers say that they spent so much time on the credits level.
Which is so funny.
Yeah.
Because some players may not even get to it, but it ends up being this sort of reward to the player.
Sure.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Ugh. I love this one. I love this game. I love this chapter. I love this work. I love that, I have this memory of this connected to its original conference setting, and then, seeing how it turned into its final form. Because I'm trying to remember. I don't think you looked at the nightmare level at that point.
I don't think so.
I think your original conference talk was you talked about the tones. You were introducing some of the smoothness that you were working on for the dissertation, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I think you might be right. It might have just been stuff from the first level, but that's always been like an important part of why I like this game, is like that contrast. Like it's not just that it does really cool things with music, but that it uses music to create these extreme different emotional and narrative responses. Like I just really like it, and that music plays such a huge role in all of that too, along with the visuals and the controls, because that's all it's got. That's all that's going on.
I can't even remember what Will talked about at that.
I don't remember.
I remember Neil talked about.
Yeah, I was gonna say Neil's
arcade games.
Arcades, yeah, I remember that.
And I mostly remember because I asked him he talked about going, I think, to the Strong Museum, or someplace that had like a physical machine, and it was a caveat because he talked about like using a MAME ROM, and then it was actually at a different pitch level than, I think it was Space Invaders, than the one that he played. And so then in Q&A I was like not to be a pain in the butt, but like, could there be detunings across different cabinets, And he kind of got this like look of terror, like maybe.
Oh, no. makes it research difficult, but yeah,
Right,
that's kind of
right. Because it's like, well, okay, I played this one, and just thinking about like the physical degradation of some of the systems, like
yeah, that makes sense.
the
Yeah,
pitch could be at a different level because like maybe
yeah,
if it hasn't been taken care of, maybe something happened. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah, it's really
So I know that
interesting.
he's been kind of like taking his time on some of like the pinball and some of the early arcade stuff, and I'm really excited to see where that ends up. And I'm glad he's taking his time because he's being so like careful and thorough. But so I remember that one. I remember this one always stood out to me because I hadn't played the game at that point, and then I have now played it, and I'm like, this is such a great game.
Yeah.
But could not tell you what Will talked about at that one. I feel like it probably was something he was thinking about for his book back then, possibly. But
I honestly don't remember.
I don't remember. It was a while ago. That would have been 2013, I think.
On the topic of flour, sometimes I do feel like I'm promoting flour. Like I'm like, everyone please play this game, because I do also use it in my classes, like not just video game music classes when I'm lucky enough to be able to teach one of those, but like I'll be teaching analysis of post-tonal music next semester, and we do a couple days with flour. Like it's such a good example of like 20th, 21st century indeterminacy, also together with like, not just, breaking out of totally diatonic stuff. Like it's got all sorts of interesting things that are relevant. So
I want to take post-tonal theory.
Looking forward to another round of post-tonal theory next semester and sneaking some video game music into that class. Very exciting.
Oh, wow. Look at Will Ayers in the chat there. William Gibbons discusses the extent to which theoretical frameworks derived from studies of film music can be fruitfully applied to diverse examples of game music. I like have a vague memory of that now that you mention it, but yeah, nicely
Cool.
done. This is got really good chat here. They're very reliable in finding things.
I remember that we had a fire alarm in the middle of Will Chang's talk.
Yes. Yeah, we had a fire alarm. The entire hotel had to get out onto the street, and then we were all just kind of standing there awkwardly. Yeah. Yeah, it was a memorable moment because that session got scheduled. It was kind of late at night. I feel like it was like 10 o'clock or something. Like it
I don't
went
know.
until
It was pretty late though.
It went until pretty late, so it was like the last. Most other people were out at the little parties, or they were like out with friends. 8 to 11. Yeah, that was a late one.
But the room was full.
Like the room was absolutely full. So.
I remember it being kind of like hey, yeah, check this out. There's interest in video game music.
Yeah, and then Will Chang founded the Ludo Study Group kind of as a result of that. I think it was even the next year he sort of had that in place, or maybe the year after, but made sure that was in place. And it's been pretty popular ever since. And then since then we've also had Music and Media Study Group got founded in the AMS too, and I was one of the folks that got asked to help found that. So because folks wanted something that could account for animation and kind of film music's proper. But that's also a place where like Ludo work can happen as well. What is he up to? Will Gibbons? Will Gibbons is currently deaning.
Yeah.
He took a job at SUNY Potsdam, and so he moved from Texas, where he had been for a number of years. You may remember he was at TC. Oh, Will Chang.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Will Gibbons is up at SUNY Potsdam deaning it out. Will Chang, as far as I know, is mostly...
He's at Dartmouth.
Yeah, he's at Dartmouth still.
But I think he's mostly not doing research on video game music right now. He's kind of moved into other areas and publishing really fascinating and interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will never forget Just Vibrations. That book is one of those just landmarks in my life that I've come back to multiple times. If you haven't read it, it's beautiful. It kind of comes out of a disability studies angle, but there's just a lot in there about kind of vulnerability and compassion and care with oneself as a musician and a scholar, and it's so good.
Yeah. Anything Will Chang writes, I'm just like, this is so good.
And that's actually where, as I try to like get my schedule ahead, I may have just enough to fill out November, but I'm thinking very shortly thereafter, I will start my monograph series. I'm going to not do them back to back, but I think the first one I'm going to do is Will's sound play.
It's so good. It's so good.
Because it's something that kind of everybody should read, I think.
Yeah.
And we can do it. My plan is to do any monographs over the course of, weeks or a month or a couple months, and then a couple chapters at a time, and then see if he's available at the end to come do like a big.
That'd be cool.
We can maybe like have a document where we're compiling things we want to talk about together, and then like turn it into a real like study group moment, and then have them on and kind of go through, okay, here's some of the things that came up when we were like going through that way they don't have to kind of be there every single week. Like I wouldn't ask that of anyone. But yeah, I was theorizing, like, I don't only want to do articles and chapters, even though they're great because they're good for this format, right? You can cover one chapter, bada bing, bada boom, but I want to make sure that I touch on major monographs, but I was trying to figure out a good way to do that. So I think it's going to be that sort of extended format.
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Cool.
So anyway, thank you so much for joining me today. I love this one. I'm really glad we got to cover it. I want to go replay this tonight.
I know, me too. Oh no. Uh-oh.
I really should be playing Assassin's Creed. But maybe I'll do a little bit of this as like a reward for getting all the footage I need from Origins. Because next week, you all may note, if you follow the Discord, and of course I'll say on Twitter and everything, instead of a normal Kudo stream, which is normally at 2 p.m. on Fridays, we will be inviting you to join the stream team at VGM Together, which is we love everyone involved on that organizing committee, and they've done such wonderful work creating a really vibrant online conference space. There's an entire Twitch channel devoted to performers of video game music, and they run continuously the entire time. And we, as the stream team, spoke at the first one on the Final Fantasy VII remake. And so they asked again, do you have anything, that you'd like to submit for this one? And we decided, this is Karen Cook, Ryan Thompson, Julianne Grasso, and I, we decided to each look at a different game in Assassin's Creed. So Karen is going to recap some forthcoming publication work on the Ezio trilogy. So she's going to look at kind of the classic Assassin's Creed. I'm going to look at Origins because I'm the Egypt nerd. And Ryan is going to look at Odyssey. And Julianne is kind of going to be our like master of ceremonies, because Julianne actually in this case I don't think Julianne has played any Assassin's Creed. So normally when we do the Final Fantasy stuff, Karen's never really played Final Fantasy games, so she's always been kind of like our color commentary, and Julianne's like, yes, I get to do it this time, and just kind of float in and have these observations. So that will be next Friday. We'll post the link to the VGM Together. They have their own Twitch channels, of course. I think we're going to be on 2, like VGM 2, but we'll post all the links. But that'll be at 7 p.m. Eastern, and of course that will be archived on the VOD. But yeah, join us if you're interested in Assassin's Creed. I'm gonna get into some fun stuff with like depicting Egypt in general, but the way that Origins kind of is a departure in some ways from previous entries in the series, etc. So join us next week. And thank you so much for joining me, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Dana. This was really great. Thanks for letting me remember how awesome Flower is.
Yeah, I think, we're both going to go play it. I'm going to play the original, though, because we have it on PS3. We do not have any of these ports. So everyone go play Flower and have a beautiful Friday.
Yay.